Afternoon, everyone. The Thursday, July 25th Executive Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 12:02 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this morning or this afternoon to please mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Please note that the committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and our audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with unofficial minutes of the meetings, are posted as soon as practicable to the board's website. During today's meeting, we are also providing Communication Access Real-Time Translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office using the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I will now call for the roll of our committee members. First Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman is out on excused absence. Treasurer Bouquet.
Present.
And this is Chair Davidson. I am present. That's 4 committee members present with 1 absent. I see, for the sake of the record, we are also joined by Director Tisdale, Director Deschelle, and Director Lewis. Thank you for joining us, directors. I will now move to the public comment section of our agenda. This is opening up public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak, and if you have not already done so, you will either raise your virtual hand on Zoom or press *9 if dialed in on your phone. During this time, the committee will not offer any direct comments or responses. However, you are welcome to contact the board office at the RTD board office email address of rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com if you would like to be contacted regarding your comments. Before proceeding with instructions for public comment further, I will not seeing any hands raised, but Mr. Kroll, do you see any hand raised at this time?
Chair Davidson, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. At this time, there is no one present who has raised their hand in desire of providing public comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll, for confirming that. Also, for the sake of the record, Mr. Kroll, can you please comment as to whether any emailed comments were received for today's meeting?
Yes, Chair Davidson, there were no emailed comments prior to this meeting today.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. With that being noted and seeing no participants in the queue, we will close the public comment period at this time. We'll now move to recommended actions. There are 2 recommended actions this afternoon. As a reminder for the committee, staff, and anyone watching and or listening to this meeting, any action item that is passed by the executive committee, even if the vote is unanimous, will be included on the board agenda under recommended actions so that the full board will have the opportunity to discuss the measure presented. The first action under consideration by the executive committee this afternoon is for item A, which is the bylaw amendment to allow the chair to appoint committee members in certain circumstances. This is for the board to amend Article 6, Section 1A to empower the chair of the board to make certain committee appointments. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have the movement as Catlin and the second as Geisinger. Thank you very much. At this time, I will open up to, for Mr. Jack Kroll, our Executive Manager of the Board Office, to see if there's anything he would like to present on this matter pursuant to our discussion item at our last Executive Committee. Mr. Kroll, please.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. I will be quick here. You all discussed this last month as a body, and you had three sort of areas where, well, there were three subsequent areas where discussions were had and or changes made. The first is that the word committee was inserted here. This is just to simply re-emphasize that it's a committee vacancy arising, not necessarily a vacancy on the board. The chair of the board, this was a change Director Guzman had asked for, chair of the board shall appoint. The language chair of was not, or excuse me, of the board was not included in last month's language. And then there was some significant debate and input provided as to whether the word shall should be changed to may. Where that conversation landed was back with shall. You know, Director Rusha had been one of the directors who raised this concern, and I followed up with her, and she had preference for shall. I circled back with Chair Davidson. He also concurred with that. So that word is shall and hasn't changed. Otherwise, this is pretty straightforward and will be a nice, effective administrative tool for the board if approved by 10 affirmative votes next week to better manage its affairs and ensure that committees are meeting as scheduled, as well as to ensure new board members who come on via the appointment process and not the election process are quickly able to get into a committee and represent their constituents accordingly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. Much appreciated. And thank you to everybody who participated in the discussion last month on this. Is there any further discussion from committee members or from board members present on this recommended action? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Kroll, to you and your team for helping make that happen, to facilitate that discussion and identifying this as an opportunity. I think this is another improvement that we're making to the bylaws. I'll go ahead and ask, are there any no votes on the action? Okay, seeing none, that will pass with 4 aye votes and 0 no votes and 1 being absent. And so it shall be. All right, we'll move on to our next recommended action. Item B, this is for the property station naming policies. This is for the board of directors to adopt the attached honorary property and station naming policy, procedures, and naming review rubric. There's a slight error that I'll note in how this item was presented in the description of the board's recommended action. It should have read that it is recommended for the board to approve both the property and station naming policy as well as the honorary property and station naming policy, procedures, and naming review rubric. As such, do we have a motion to approve both the property station naming policy in addition to the honorary property and station naming policy, procedures, and naming review rubric?
So moved.
I think I heard the movement as Treasurer Bouquet. I did cut out a little bit there, but I did hear that. And then I heard the second as Geisinger. Thank you very much. At this time, first of all, before handing off the floor, again, I would just like to thank everybody who worked on this. Directors Rusha and Sloan worked on this with Mr. Kroll and his team, Mr. Davies, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Snyder. A lot of people have touched this and collaborated on this, and thank you very much for doing that and taking and helping us find a structured approach to station naming requests. Really, really appreciate the work that was done offline to prepare this for today, not to mention the discussion items we've had leading up to this, where a lot of feedback has been solicited by not just this committee, but all directors and provided. So thank you. And with that being said, I'll hand off again to Mr. Kroll to please present the item.
Great. I will, since it's been relatively long time since you've all seen this, I just want to kind of recap what the ask was of the group that worked on this. So back in early January of this year, you all sort of provided direction to the board office to work with staff and a couple of directors, those being Directors Sloan and Rusha, to develop two things. One is an overarching property and station naming policy. The second is your honorary property and station naming policy procedures and rubric. This is because, there's really two ways to look at, or there's two layers to what we're proposing here. First is your overarching property and station naming policy, and then subsequent to that is your honorary property and station naming policy. That's because there is a primary effort, the primary name of a station or property needs to remain the wayfinding name. And so the group met several times. We presented back in April to the executive committee and to the full board. And then we're asked at that point to make a few changes and come back as soon as we could to bring those changes forward. Those changes most notably were to bring forward a rubric in addition to what we had already presented. There was strong interest from board members in seeing a rubric attached to this. Additionally, there was some information and input from Director Lewis, who had rightly pointed out that the way we had initially proposed this, we might put ourselves in a position where we're sort of perpetually reviewing applications to rename a property or station, or excuse me, add a secondary honorary name to a property or station. And so we believe we've addressed all of those concerns. We've made a few other tweaks, and now we're bringing it back for review. I would like to just walk everyone through the documents real quick. I don't, want to save questions to the end. I think if you have a question as we go along, please raise it. And we'll try and move through these as quickly as we can here. Okay, so starting with the overarching policy, this is again an amalgamation of 3 actions that the board previously took in 1994, 2003, and 2011, and updated based off of the work that we did. But for the most part, what you're seeing here is a reflection of what was previously acted upon by the board. There was never a single document that coalesced all of these things or all 3 of those actions. So we've done that, and then we've made some updates along the way. Most notably, we added a section here for honorary property names. Again, honorary property names or station names are secondary to the primary wayfinding name. As you may recall, we did a lot of outreach to other APTA organizations to get their input. And one of the things that was paramount in what we heard back from them, as well as from our staff, is that wayfinding remain the primary focus of any station name, and that an honorary name be a secondary name. Sponsorships, there's been a good amount of conversation around how sponsorships interact with honorary names. And at this point, we're proposing a system that is effectively mutually exclusive. So what this means is that if there is a station that comes into an honorary secondary name, it would not be eligible for a corporate sponsorship. And the same is true in reverse. If there's a station or property that has received a corporate sponsorship, it would not be eligible during the time frame of that sponsorship for an honorary property name. In the board report, the final thing I'll say on this note, in the board report, the group that worked on this did recommend 3 areas of potential additional inquiry. And one of those was to consider, based off input we'd received both from staff and the group that was working on this, whether it would be prudent to continue to have the practice of having corporate sponsorships as an option for our properties and station. However, we're not weighing in on that. We're just saying that it might be worthwhile for the board to look at that further. One thing that's important to note on this too, in the previous actions the board took in, I think it was the 2011 action, there was a note that the name change cost would need to be absorbed by whomever is proposing that name change. But that is not to apply to an honorary or secondary name added to a station or property. Where this idea initially came from is, let's say, for example, RTD partnered and did outreach in the initial build out of a line and worked with the local municipality to set a name for a station. Well, 4 or 5 years go down the line, and that local municipality thinks we should actually change this wayfinding name or the station name, the primary name, to something else. Well, that was where RTD had previously contemplated, as has this board, that you would work with that entity to provide the cost of changing the name. However, we have very clearly and explicitly stated here that that does not apply to an honorary or secondary name. We did discuss that at length, and we felt as though putting the cost onus on the proposers might, the applicants for an honorary or secondary name might impose too great of a barrier. So that's why that was not included there. And then the last thing I'll note here is the scope. This is applying to your transit stations, park and rides, transfer centers, and other major passenger facilities, maintenance facilities, and administrative buildings. This is not, getting into the granular, how do we rename a bus stop? That's not something the board is tasked with. That's not something the board is doing here. It is looking at big facilities, major facilities only in this policy. So that's the overarching policy, and I'll maybe stop there and see if there's any questions before we move into the policy for honorary and secondary names.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I appreciate that walkthrough. Very helpful, as both a refresh and what's changed and where we've settled. Are there any questions on that first portion there from directors? All right, seeing none, Mr. Kroll, please go ahead and proceed.
So again, this is your honorary property and station naming policy as proposed. This top part is pretty self-explanatory, but I want to highlight here that we've explicitly stated that, it's not just individuals that could be recognized as being significant enough to deserve this honor. It's also groups of individuals, organizations, or a major event. For example, there's some significant discussion afoot in New York to rename a station after the Stonewall riots, which were a major civil rights occurrence for the LGBTQ community in New York some decades ago. So that's an example of something similar that we had contemplated that could come into play down the line. The eligibility criteria is a key part to focus on here. What we are looking for in applications submitted to rename a property or provide a secondary name, I should say, an honorary name to a property or station, are documented significant contributions to public transit nationally, public transit within the RTD, and or within the vicinity of the property subject to a potential renaming. Again, the Stonewall riots are one example of where proximity might add value to renaming a station. We might also contemplate in our own history how proximity is significant with respect to, say, Civic Center and the Gang of 19, as well as Wade Blank's efforts. Their protests having occurred just across the street from where Civic Center is now located. Then, in addition to documented historical information provided in a narrative to the board, there would also need to be some additional things that occur. First and foremost, a demonstrated breadth and depth of public support for the proposal by way of formal letters of support from community leaders. I want to stop here and let you all know that the committee really debated significantly, the working group, I should say, debated significantly whether there should be a specific number of letters hung on this requirement, and where we ultimately felt, given that we have a review committee that I'll get to later, is we didn't want to tie the hands of the review committee or the board by saying you need to submit 10 letters. What's really more important is not necessarily the volume of letters, but the breadth. Are they coming from a wide range of the community, or are they coming from a rather narrow band of the community? It's easy to imagine a situation where you might get 15 letters, but it's only from a subsection of your community, and it doesn't really represent broad support for it. And then a review by the Honorary Property Name Proposal Review Committee, which we'll cover again here in a moment, and then a 2/3 majority vote of approval by the board. A couple exclusions are indicated here. Former board members are not eligible, and any individual who has not been deceased for at least 10 years. This was an idea that we borrowed when we met with folks at the City and County of Denver's Parks Department who are working on revamping Denver's approach to public art as well as civic recognition. And I think it's, you know, no secret that oftentimes there are things that can come to light about an individual that weren't previously known. And so building in a buffer zone of 10 years allows the board to be sure, relatively sure, that there's not going to be anything that's really negative that comes out about an individual's history after a renaming or an honorary name has been bestowed. And then again, the last thing I'll mention here, following a discussion and opportunity for public comment, the board may remove an honorary name by a 2/3 majority vote. The last time you saw this was just a simple majority vote. We felt 2/3 and matching the 2/3 needed to add a name should also be the requirement to remove a name, and then also adding in this public process. So, you know, you couldn't just decide to remove a name from a station without at least a modicum of public input. Generally speaking, if you ever got to that point, it would probably be pretty clear and convincing as to why you would want to remove a name. But nonetheless, this element here protects against potentially capricious behavior. Any questions on that before I move on to the procedures?
Any questions from directors on the policy before the procedures? Committee members or other directors present? Seeing none, and I expect there's probably going to be some at the end here, Mr. Kroll, but please go ahead and proceed.
Great. So this is the procedures document. Why is it important to have a procedures document? Well, you can have your policy, but how do you get from your starting point to your end point? And what does the public understand about, you know, how you all are going to make your decision and the steps they need to take in order to get there? And so I'll just quickly jump down to, well, actually in this overview here, there's a note that I want to make that Director Lewis had raised. You know, he had raised concerns at the April meeting that we might put ourselves into this position where the committee that's going to be the initial reviewer of these proposals is almost perpetually meeting. So what we did is we added language here that specifically states each year the chair of the board will convene the honorary property name proposal review committee no more than once. So while we will accept applications on a rolling basis, you're not going to be obligated to meet every time you receive an application. Rather, you know, in coordination with the board office, the chair can get a sense of how many applications have come in since the last time the committee has met, how time sensitive are these applications, and then convene the committee. So that's in response to Director Lewis's feedback. And then quickly the steps here. First, an honorary, you know, property name application to the board of directors by way of the board office needs to be submitted, and that should include the summary of the individual or the group or the organization's contributions to transit locally, nationally, as well as any connection to the location, letters of support from a range of individuals, groups, and organizations. Again, this is, you know, we debated this, but we felt like it's important to emphasize range and depth in that as opposed to a specific number. And then a formal resolution. This is a big one. This was in the policy the last time you saw it, or in the procedures the last time you saw it. But this really sets a high bar. It should be very rare for RTD to be renaming stations because only those who are most deserving should have that honor bestowed. And so we debated this heavily as a group, but really came down on this idea that a formal resolution in order to rename a station that primarily serves passengers would be required from the local city or county commissioners. That would not apply to, say, if the board wanted to change the name of district shops or something like that. So we specifically called that out, and that is different from the last time you saw this, just specifically noting that it would only apply to passenger serving stations, this requirement to get support from the local city council or county commissioners. Following the receipt of an application packet, the board office notifies the board so that you know there's one in there. You all can take a look if you like at that point too. And then again, re-emphasizing no more than once annually, the chair of the RTD board of directors in consultation with the GM and CEO impanels this initial review committee. Why is a review committee even important in all of this? I know this is a little dry, but you really want some external validation. You want the community to support it, and having an initial review committee take a look at this with a clear set of guidelines in the rubric that we'll cover as our last item here is important to lend additional credence to the board's decision. And it also provides a great opportunity for community engagement. So these are the 8 individuals on there. One thing changed is we got feedback. There was originally a call for 2 historians. We got feedback at the April meeting that the board would prefer to see 1. So we've adjusted that accordingly. New this go around is this notion that the chair of the RTD board of directors, in consultation of the GM and CEO, would designate a member of the review committee to serve as the chair. That was not in the previous document you all saw, but it's important. You know, we sat down around the end here and thought, oh boy, who's going to lead that review committee? How will they decide that? And, you know, we're proposing that the chair just pick someone from that group. And then a couple things to highlight here at the end. Director Rusha was pretty, I think, insightful and artful in making the point that the board would want to have an avenue by which it could reserve its rights to pull forward more than one proposal for consideration each year. And so we've added some language here that the executive committee would have the capacity, after being briefed on the proposals by the review committee, would have the capacity to exercise its own discretion in deciding which proposals may or may not move forward. We did limit it to 1. Again, that was in the default is to only get 1 proposal to the board each year unless the executive committee decides otherwise. And the reason why it was set to 1 is so that we really honored and respected the gravity of these renamings of these secondary and honorary names. You didn't want to be you don't want to be flooded or inundated with these name change requests, because they also take a lot of significant time from staff. However, if there were multiple requests in 1 year that really did meet that threshold, the executive committee reserves the right to go in and consider those further. Any questions on this before I move to the final item, which is the rubric? All right.
I see First Vice Chair Catlin. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jack, I know that we talked about a historian or somebody with expertise. I'm just curious how we would go about identifying such a person, and if there has been any interest expressed from said scholars, or, I mean, do we have a pool from which to choose?
Yeah, that's actually, you've jogged my memory on this, Director Catlin. This language on this section here, coming from a local university, library, or museum who has a record of scholarly work in transit, local, or Colorado history. This was fleshed out more based off of a similar comment we had in April at the board meeting to say, where are we going to pull this from? You know, there has not been outreach done by me proactively yet to start identifying these folks. However, what I've included in the board report is a paragraph that states, if you all approve this next week, we would effectively go live with this in October. I know that seems like, oh gosh, 2 more months, but it's going to give us the time that we need to work with civil rights, with government relations, and with communications to get the word out. In that time too, I can establish and reconnect with various different entities who may offer access to a historian. There are several things that immediately come to my mind. We have prominent major universities. I have a few relationships still left at the University of Colorado that I can call in. My father, not to make this too personal, but he spent his career at the Denver Public Library actually managing the Western History Department there. On a separate project, we've been in touch as well with the state archives related to historical records for the board. And those would be the places I would initially turn to solicit some interest for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, First Vice Chair. Mr. Kroll, please go ahead.
Okay, last but not least is the rubric. This is the document that when we presented in April, there was clear consensus from the board that that we should have a rubric included in this process so that the public understands and those making and submitting applications are aware of how they'll be graded and scored, or the bar that they need to meet rather. So there's really three categories here. They tie directly back to the policy and the requirements there. So the first is historical significance to RTD. If you recall, I highlighted at the beginning of that document, that there needed to be from each proposed honoree significant documented contributions to RTD, to transit nationally, to RTD, or to the location in which the station or property resides that's being considered for a secondary name. So that is what this first section spells out. The second section is getting into this idea of the breadth and depth of community support. And so providing some clear guidance to the review committee on what constitutes significant breadth and depth of community support. And then the third item is directly pulled from RTD's values. In that narrative that's provided in the application, is it clear and demonstrable that the honoree lived a life or is an organization that stands up for the values that RTD shares, or was an event that reflects the values that RTD has. And with that, that concludes everything I wanted to give you all an overview of. I know it's a lot. It's probably a bit pedantic for some, but I think it's a very thorough process that provides the board with a very clear and defensible process and sets the bar extremely high for any organization that wants to bring forward and honor someone. At the end of the day, it might be a lot, but these are, I'll reemphasize, it is pretty rare to do this nationally. And so building a transparent process that sets the bar really high, I think, is important in this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. I appreciate that. And thank you for those comments that the bar being high. I think the goal is to have the bar be appropriately high given significant cost and changes that would occur. So thank you for the work on that, and thank you for walking us through that and presenting it. I'll go next to questions, first starting with committee members, and then any other directors that are present after that, starting with First Vice Chair Catlin. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And Mr. Kroll, I really appreciate this, but I think that the very thoughtful and thorough nature of the policy and the procedures and the rubric really demonstrate that this is an item that we take very seriously, and that it will not be capricious or frivolous in its application. So thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. Appreciate that. I echo those sentiments. Other committee members? Are there any other directors who would like to comment or have any questions on this before we take a vote? Director Lewis, please go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to thank Jack and his staff for working on this. I know it started as an idea proposed by the disability community to rename a building, and RTD took that on, and just want to again thank him for all the work he's done, because there was a lot of changes along the way, and I think this has gotten to a point that it's a document that people can be proud of, and I think everybody's looking forward to using this document to rename something pretty soon here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Not seeing other hands. I'll just make a few comments, and I do have one question before making those comments. So my question is actually for General Manager and CEO Johnson on this, and thank you for your engagement in this process as well, and your team's engagement with the board office's staff. I think this has been a good collaboration. But given your experience around the country, and given that we were looking at other agencies, I just wanted to confirm with you to ensure that we've landed in a place where you feel from your staff's perspective, and given with the context of your experience and background, that we're in a place where this is practical, where it can be executed, where the bar is where it should be, and that these represent policies and procedures that we can follow and truly implement on a go-forward basis. So Ms. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Deborah Johnson, General Manager, CEO. Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. There were thorough analysis done relative to other transit agencies as indicated by the report that Mr. Kroll articulated. Generally speaking, one looks at geographic location for ease of navigation, especially for people that aren't familiar with the area. Keeping in mind as well that generally the geographic location is the primary identifier for a station, and that any name change recognizing or honoring an individual is usually a subset. Moreover, as we look at head signs on vehicles and things of the like, it will generally speak to the geographic location. So this is more or less in line with my experience, and a lot of the agencies that were identified are ones of which I am very familiar. And I believe that this presents equitable and open and fair opportunity for a myriad of different demographics should they elect to put forward a recommendation for a change. And as a body, for all intents and purposes, RTD should not be assuming the costs, and as it's outlined relative to the responsibility, I believe is in line with good industry practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, for commenting on that. And then my comments further. Mr. Kroll, thank you for your work on this. I know this was a lot, and collaborating both with with the board, with your staff, as well as with General Manager and CEO Johnson's staff as well. This was a lot. And Mr. Kroll, I give you tremendous credit in recognizing that when we did have a request that came in, quickly identifying that we did not have policies and procedures to field those requests, and taking this as an opportunity to go further than just simply considering one-off requests, and identifying the opportunity and the need to create something like this. So thank you for identifying that. Thank you for engaging with the board on this. Again, thank you to Directors Ruscia and Sloan, and to all members of staff who participated in this that were mentioned earlier. I think we've landed in a good place, and this gives us a great framework to move forward from. So with that all being said, and with the additional context from Ms. Johnson, which once again, thank you for providing, are there any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll move on to the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? All right, wonderful. That's great. That's 4 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 1 absent. Thank you very much once again. Delighted to see where we were able to land with that. All right, we will now move to the July board meeting agenda review. This is for the board for us to approve the board meeting agenda for July 2024. Because of the majority of July's committee meetings happened in 1 week, most of our action items for the executive committee agenda planning purposes were considered to be unanimous. There is one change from Tuesday's and Wednesday's vote outcomes. The September 2024 service change will not be included in the consent agenda, and that will be voted on separately. This will be reflected in the board agenda for next week. So thank you to everybody for your patience on that. We had a lot of things happening in 1 week, and thank you very much to the board office, Mr. Kroll, you and your entire team here for helping pull everything together here on a compressed timeline. Additionally, I do want to note that I, along with board office executive manager Jack Kroll, did receive written requests from 3 directors to add a director initiated discussion item to next week's agenda. This was directors Deschel, Harwick, and Ruscia requesting that a discussion item be added to our agenda focused on Director Ruscha's and Director Harwick's work related to Vision Zero. Per our bylaws, the request to add an item to the agenda must be received in writing by 3 directors by noon on the Wednesday prior to the board meeting. We did receive 2 requests by noon and a third came in later, and therefore all requests were not received on time. However, our bylaws do stipulate that it then falls to the discretion of the chair to add the item or not. I did commit to adding the discussion item to the agenda as long as the board office was able to receive all of the supporting items, including any attachments and presentations, given their compressed timeline this week by the deadline of noon today, Mountain Daylight Time. We did not receive those and completely understand. We're all on compressed timelines to make this happen. Board Office Executive Manager Jack Kroll did inform me that we don't have all of the supporting materials in hand at this time. As such, we will not add this discussion item for Vision Zero to the agenda as for next week's meeting. However, I will be in close touch with Operations Safety and Security Committee Chair Whitmore, as we have already been on this issue, and he is letting me know that a discussion item will be at the Operations Safety and Security Committee meeting at the September agenda. I would also like to further note that I certainly invite any of the directors who had placed a request or those directly involved in the Vision Zero initiative to please feel free to provide an update to the board in public during other matters, simply verbally stating what's going on and reminding everybody that there will be a full discussion item coming forward to the Operations Safety and Security meeting in September. So thank you to everybody involved in that important initiative for all the work that has been done there. And once again, thank you to the board office for working not just on this, but a number of items on a compressed timeline to prepare for next week's busy board meeting agenda. With all of that being stated, and the background being provided, and the update being made to the consent agenda, I will ask if we have a motion to move the July board agenda to the board meeting on Tuesday, June 30th, with those changes noted.
So moved.
Second.
I hear Catlin as the movant. I hear Geisinger as the second. And we will now have discussion. Again, I will start with any committee members on discussion, then move to other directors. Seeing no committee members, I will go to Director Ruscha, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not even sure if I can comment at this per our rules at this point because I'm not part of the executive committee. But thank you for the recommendation. I just wanted to note that regarding Vision Zero, we do have materials. I submitted them at 12/12. And I understand if you would like to keep that hard deadline, I sent you a text as to, you know, what the intent was, or some context, I would say. But just for the record, the meeting materials or the discussion of materials were the same as OSS. We had just gotten feedback that we could shorten it a little bit. So we were pulling out a few slides and also slides 20 and 21, which was what we were asking the board to do, needed additional clarification, which I do think might just be better clarified in the attached report. However, I understand if you need to keep it off the agenda. There was some confusion this week as to whether or not we would be allowed to present. And I made a commitment to change this PowerPoint by noon, and I will own that. So I also just feel like I just want to see that on the record. And yeah. I didn't know, sir, if there was a way to comment before you called for the vote. So I'm sorry if I went out of order in your meeting, but thank you for allowing me a chance to explain.
No problem, Director Ruscha. Thank you for sharing the information. I do see some materials that have come in. What I'll ask for is this. we will not have this on the board agenda item for next week as a discussion item. But I do hope that there's a robust, full discussion that will inform any further actions to come at that September Operations Safety and Security meeting. But I would ask Mr. Kroll if you could please help. I will work with you offline in ensuring that all the materials that have been provided are fully provided to all board directors prior to our meeting next week on Tuesday, so that if the matter does come up in other matters, which Director Arusha, I would encourage you to provide an update on that. And I will also ask for Committee Chair Whitmore to do the same, to update on the plan for discussion. Directors will have the benefit of having been provided any of those existing materials, which I do understand are similar or the same as those that already been provided. So we'll proceed with that being the plan. Director Arusha, with that being stated, I see your hand is still up, and would you like to comment further?
Yes, sir. So our bylaws state that we will take public comment on things that are agendized, and we have over like 20 something CBOs, community-based organizations, who have either directly worked on this or have since lent their support. And so I know this is at your discretion, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would they still be able to make a comment, just recognizing just recognizing that we've put this on pause for a bit, you know, to allow other matters to come forth that were obviously very pressing for the agency. I don't want because it won't be the materials won't be in the agenda packet unless you elect to put them there. And I would still like to give community an opportunity to speak before we go on break. And I also feel like those leading organizations have been very patient with us as we try to work out something on the calendar. So I just wanted to flag, and I understand if that's not a question to be asked now, but or answered, excuse me, but just for your consideration, so that the CBOs are aware of what they can do, because our bylaws are very specific. It has to be on the current or previous agenda for public comment. And that really
Thank you,
was,
Director Arusha.
yeah, thank you. And that really was, you know, in addition to making sure all of our colleagues knew exactly what the ask was and where we were, if they missed the OSS meeting, that was the other purpose as well, is just making sure we kept our promise to those CBOs, because they, many of them are aware of the rules, and we had such overwhelmingly positive response to this project that I was hoping to give them that space, because we're going on break in August. So that's the comment, and I wanted to put it out there, and we can maybe talk offline as to how we would deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Arusha. Noted, and I will consider how we'll approach that public comment and communicate that out. But I did see Mr. Kroll's hand go up during that. I just wanted to check in with you if your hand went up in response to Director Arusha's comment or question there. Mr. Kroll, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davidson. Previous Chair Lynn Geisinger and I actually worked through a similar issue. While each of the committees restricts public comment to what's on the agenda for this month and then the preceding month, your full board meetings have no such restrictions. So you would be capable of receiving public comment on any host of issues at that time.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity, Mr. Kroll. And I do think with that being said, and Director Arusha, if there was communication you wanted to put out to the CBOs on that, please feel free to do so, and we can receive any comment on that. It's also, as I understand, we have had some discussions and updates on this fairly recently, so it's very reasonable to stand. So please feel free to communicate that out, Director Arusha, and Mr. Kroll, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, seeing no further discussion on our agenda, I'll call for the vote. Are there any no votes on moving the agenda forward? Seeing none, that will also pass with 4 yes, 0 no, and 1 absent. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion and the comments. We'll now move to our discussion items. We have 4 discussion items this afternoon. The first is the monthly government relations report for July 2024. Mr. Michael Davies, our government relations officer, thank you for joining us here as always. I will now hand off the floor to you to please present the item. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. I just have a brief report for you all. Starting at the federal level, in the written report, it really focuses on the House appropriations process and where we are there. The House appropriations process has gone through the full committee, and they voted to pass a bill. Notably, there is less funding in that bill for discretionary programs, and it was really communicated out on the House side that that's due to the advanced appropriations that was associated with the IIJA, larger surface transportation bill. That said, in the written report, it noted that there was nothing on the Senate side that happened. And then actually, earlier this morning, the Senate Appropriations Committee moved forward. They basically skipped the subcommittee process and went straight to the full committee. And they were able to pass out a bipartisan bill earlier this morning on the Senate side that funds transportation program. That bill largely adheres to all of the funding recommendations in the IIJA, and which basically means that all of the discretionary grant funding that was not included in the House bill is included in the Senate bill. So there will certainly be, as I think we've talked about before in this committee, there will certainly be negotiations between the House and the Senate. Whether those negotiations take place by the end of the federal fiscal year, which is September 30th, that is yet to be seen. And if they aren't, they'll have to pass a continuing resolution to keep the federal government funded, or come up with a compromise on that by that time. The other thing I just want to make sure that the committee is all aware of is that in the House bill, there is community project funding, which is essentially the process that replaced earmarks from years and years before, that allow members to sponsor specific projects. And Representative DeGette, who previously has been able to secure funding for RTD's near-term downtown rail reconstruction project, was able to get another $850,000 added into the House bill for federal fiscal year 25. So that's good news. I haven't been able to see what happened on the Senate side in terms of their equivalent to the community project funding. They only have a summary of the bill posted so far. So I'll report back to the committee on what's included on the Senate side of the funding bill. Moving to the state, as the time of the writing of the report, RTD really only knew that the TLRC was going to hold 3 meetings and set dates for those. So in between July 13th, when the report was written, RTD had worked with the committee and selected September 25th as the date that RTD would go and present before the TLRC. And so that's the update that wasn't really included in the written report, but look forward to participating with the committee. And not much more to report there. There was a hearing earlier this week on July 23rd. I haven't had a good chance to listen to the full report yet, as I was out of the office earlier this week, and we'll report back on any of those discussions to the full committee. And then moving on to the local side of things, as noted in the board, or in the board report, have had a lot of engagement with all of the local municipalities recently, and that was largely through the sub-regional service councils. Had a great opportunity, I think, to answer questions related to the legislation that was passed last year at the state level, with some of the transit funding, and just kind of getting everybody on the same page with timelines and process for developing and getting that funding out the door at the state level. So that was a good opportunity, I think, to talk with all of our municipal partners on some of that legislation passed earlier this year. Also had an opportunity to engage with Lone Tree Mayor Marissa Harmon. That was a great meeting and good opportunity to build a relationship there. Mayor Harmon is the new mayor that's taken over there in Lone Tree. And then lastly, not included in the written report, I joined NATA, or the North Area Transportation Association, earlier this morning and had an opportunity to engage with them on legislation passed and answer any questions regarding RTD. So with that, that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. Greatly appreciate the report, as always. I'll now open up for any questions from committee members to start. Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions. I do have a comment, and thank you, Mr. Davies. That was a good report. I know that yesterday when the TLRC met, both our chair and Mr. Davies were out of town, and Ms. Johnson had her schedule set as Mr. Davies said, the change was made recently. I think several of us listened to that TLRC. Director Lewis, I heard, did a very nice job. I was in transit at that point with his CCDC hat on, and I did go down for the afternoon. I did not address the committee as a whole, but I wanted to. There was an article apparently today that says RTD rebuffed the committee and RTD is circling the wagons. And that is clearly not the case. And I did get the chance to talk with some of the sponsors of 1447 and just expressed, and I think our chair did as well through text, that we would like to engage. And I know that Ms. Johnson's letter to them also said this, that we do intend to engage and work with them before they move forward with whatever legislation they're considering this year. At the end of the session, the committee said, or at least some of the committee said, that they were going to start something on Transit Tuesdays. I don't know exactly what that is, but I'm putting that in your ear because I think that will be a way to start talking with them. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Second Vice Chair. And yes, certainly it is our intent, the entire agency, to engage robustly with the TLRC, and appreciate Ms. Johnson's letter and kind on that. Mr. Davies, your report, and Second Vice Chair Geisinger, along with other directors, thank you for being in attendance and listening in there. And did, as you had noted, did have the opportunity to communicate with one legislator yesterday during my travels to indicate that the date simply had not worked out for a large number of us, but that we will be attending at future meetings, and of course are thoroughly engaged. So thank you for noting that, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Are there any other questions or comments from directors? Any directors aside from committee members? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Mr. Davies, thank you very much. I always appreciate not just you being here, but also the written reports that you've been submitting to the board as well. Thank you. All right, we'll now move to our second discussion item. This is for the audit committee member selection process. We'll go ahead. I know Director Deschel was here. He did need to leave the meeting. Unfortunately, he may be rejoining us. Should he do so during other matters, I'll see if there's any further comments he wanted to make. But this is for the audit committee member selection process. At this time, I'd like to hand off to Mr. Jack Kroll, our executive manager of the board office, to please present the item.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. I'll be brief on this one. You formulated, as you all are very well aware, your independent audit committee back towards the end of 2022, and it's started meeting at the beginning of 2023. You have a system by which the audit committee is comprised of both board members and external members. 3 board members with 2 external members for a total of 5 members. 3 members are approaching a potential crossroads with respect to their term on the committee. 2 members will have their committee terms expire. That's actually John Ohlenberger, who's an external member, and Eric Davidson. We will be very sad when Director Davidson leaves his capacity with RTD at the end of the year, but we need to prepare for it nonetheless. The initial term for John Ohlenberger was 2 years, and that will expire on December 31st, 2024. I have been in touch with John. He has indicated a desire to continue in his role. Chair Davidson's term will expire, and he will no longer be a board member in addition to his term on the audit committee expiring. And then the third position that is in some flux is that Director Deschel, as we all know, is not running for re-election. However, he was reappointed last year alongside Director Catlin for a 2-year term expiring at the end of 2025. Given the staggering the committee and the board anticipated, there actually being a time when a director's term as a board member expired prior to their term on the audit committee expiring. And so in anticipating such an event, there's actually a way for the board to afford Director Deschel the opportunity of staying on the audit committee as one of the 3 board representatives through the end of his term as an audit committee member, even though he will no longer be on the board. So guaranteed at this point, you have 1 vacancy approaching with Director Davidson's departure, and you may have a second vacancy if Director Deschel chooses not to continue or the board opts to replace Director Deschel with a current board member. And then you could open up the external membership position currently held by John, Mr. Ohlenberger, but however, he has indicated he is interested in returning. So with that, I want to cue up the conversation by saying, you all, 2 years ago, when you filled these appointments, had a process for both board members and external members to go through. Director Davidson and Director Catlin could fill you in more on that, but effectively you advertised this on LinkedIn for external members and on the RTD website for external members. And then you did also request for any board members who are interested to submit a letter of interest as well as a resume outlining their qualifications. So what I'm looking for at this point is just direction on how you all want to go about filling the director position that will become vacant, as well as whether you all would be okay with reappointing Mr. Ohlenberger without a process there, similar to how you all reappointed Directors Catlin and Deschel last year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kroll. And before opening up for questions and discussions from other directors, I did just want to note for those present, I think many of us will recall that there were a couple things that we were solving for in this. Much of that is noted and shared within the board packet, but I would summarize some of what was being solved for as being searching for the right ensuring that we have the right experience and expertise within the audit committee, ensuring continuity within the audit committee, and also preserving institutional knowledge and ensuring that knowledge remain intact, which of course is very much linked to continuity, although somewhat separate. And so with that being the case, we had developed this process for having members that I think most notably, and I'm glad we anticipated the situation that Director Deschel finds himself in, that he will be mid-term when he will no longer be a board director. And some of the discussions around that the then ad hoc audit committee had around this were around allowing a roll-off period so that we preserve that institutional knowledge and maintain some continuity during a transition. So we find ourselves in this interesting position, but it was well anticipated I think in opening up for questions and discussion, we're really solving here today for the direction as Mr. Kroll laid out on both Mr. Ohlenberger's position and do we support the concept of there being interest to continue and therefore reappointing. We're then also looking at and reminding ourselves of that process so that we can solicit Director Deschel's interest in completing his term as well. So all of that being said, I'll go ahead and open up for the discussion and questions, starting with first Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You touched on it briefly, but I believe that we allowed for the extension of a year for directors should they go off the board if they wanted to still serve on the audit committee. So that may be an option for Directors Davidson and Deschel if they were interested.
And thank you for that comment. Yes. Are there other questions or comments on this, either from committee members or other directors that may still be present? See that some directors have dropped. I'll make the comment, and as Mr. Kroll, I know you're seeking direction here, and see what my colleagues think of this. I think that, given that we offered the opportunity to extend the position to our inside members, and given that this was about developing that knowledge, that expertise, and ensuring continuity, I think it does make sense to offer that same opportunity to our external members on the committee, unless we were having a conversation around any performance concerns of the audit committee itself or any particular member, or whether we were seeing, significant interest on the outside around this. I, for one, will speak that I've been happy with where the audit committee is moving. I think we're refining processes and learning all the time and getting better. But when we look at where we were a few years ago, it is night and day difference, and we have a well-functioning audit committee. And I do credit our current committee members with a lot of that work, as well as our staff and our external, our contracted internal auditors. So I'm very happy with our current external members, and if folks are looking for a recommendation from me, having been on the committee, it would be my recommendation that we extend the same offer to extend the term, just as we did to our internal members, unless there's some performance concern. So that's my feedback, and I'm happy to work with you, Mr. Kroll, on realizing and moving that forward, should that be the direction of executive committee. First Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely concur with that sentiment. And as a side note, I wanted to say that there was mention made of our audit committee at the TLRC, and it was very positive that was a direction that RTD had taken that was very positive. So I just wanted to make note of that, because I think that some of the other messaging got lost or diluted that particular comment that was made, and I very much appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for noting that. And I know you and I would share being happy with with that being noticed and discussed and acknowledged. I think it's a good governance step. And, as always, thanks, First Vice Chair Catlin, for your leadership of the entire development of the audit committee and leading the ad hoc audit committee. I think we ended in a great place there. Any other comments? Any other concerns? My recommendation, again, being we proceed with offering extension. Seeing a thumbs up from Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Great. Well, Mr. Kroll, I'll work with you offline, and we'll touch base with Director Deschel, who did let me know he was going to have to leave today. And we can discuss the path forward. So thank you. And we'll be bringing forward some actions around this soon.
Yes, specifically, you're slated to take action on appointing committee members in November.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kroll, for noting that. And as always, should any directors between now and then, when we're getting that appointment ready, have any further input or thoughts on this, please feel free to reach out to myself and or the board office on this as well, or also Director Deschel, who serves as our current chair of the audit committee. Okay, with that being stated, we'll move to our third discussion item. This is the 2025 board retreat planning. This won't be the last time we're collecting retreat topics, I am sure, but this is to start our process planning for next year so that we supply ourselves ample time to do so and ensure the retreat is effective. So with that, Mr. Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office, are there any things that you would like to comment or present with regards to this item?
No, I would just say we're going to talk about it again in September, and just looking for initial feedback. The type of ideas that we are looking for input on are calendar date, how long you want to go in the day, what are your desired outcomes or topics, and on this facilitation note, I mean, that is a large expense that gets incurred every year with respect to these retreats. There's been a fair amount of discussion internally amongst the board office and folks in general counsel and the executive office. We have resources within house to potentially facilitate certain sections too and saving some costs. So this is very preliminary, but what are your thoughts on the retreat? We'll again discuss in September once we've taken some initial direction, brought back some further ideas and thoughts. But for now, what's top of mind?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kroll. Appreciate it. Any thoughts from directors present?
We can also just wait till September, and maybe one of the things that we can do too in the meantime is send out a survey to board members and get some initial input, and that can further inform our discussion in September.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mr. Kroll. I will say there are a couple things we've put a pin in along the way and said this might be a good retreat topic. And one that I will note that I know is on your radar, Mr. Kroll, but I'll just state here for the record and for other directors here, is the concept of whether or not, as we work through our training policies and procedures for the onboarding of new directors, there could potentially be, and I don't want to get out in front of the work. We spoke at a board meeting about having some directors work on this, which currently Secretary Guzman, Director Whitmore are working on and looking at together along with Mr. Kroll. I don't want to get too far out in front of them, but there could potentially be multiple facets to this. There is the training of new directors coming on board. There's also whether or not directors would like any kind of ongoing training or topics to be touched on or special topics. We've talked about potentially using retreat time that way. Those are some things that have come up that we've put a pin in. I suspect that the outcome of those policies and discussions is something that should be brought up at the retreat and talk about what training will look like. And so I would suggest that certainly be a topic. We've also had, I think, some topics come up around related to our next discussion item actually here today, which is how we leverage work plans to refine the focus of what we're communicating between board and staff on, what expectations are around communication, and how we focus the efforts of the board to ensure alignment and productive action. So we've now used the work plans for a year. I think it would make sense to look back and see how those work plans are serving us and how we might want to adjust, in addition to, of course, working on them. But just as a reminder to everybody, we also put a pin in how can we use the work plans to better focus all of our efforts. So that may serve as a good topic as well. So those would be two things that I would just throw out there as things I have notes as having said, let's come back to that and maybe consider that for the retreat.
Great.
Great. Not seeing any other hands raised. We will now move to our fourth discussion item, which is board to staff communication and requests for information and or work product. I'll kick off this conversation and then see if First Vice Chair Catlin, there's any words you'd like to provide on the matter. And then once those are provided, we'll open up for further discussion. I know we don't have too many directors here present, and this will be coming back up again, but I'll just touch on a few things here. First of all, thank you very much to all directors for their feedback at our last executive committee when we did discuss this and solicit feedback. Thank you to Mr. Kroll, Miss Knapp Rhodes for working with us on the feedback as well on this matter, and General Manager and CEO Johnson for your engagement on this as well in refining this. What we have ultimately decided to do to improve or enhance our board to staff communications and ensure that our values are well respected within that was make an update to our board operating guidelines. I had the opportunity to engage with Mr. Kroll, with First Vice Chair Catlin, and General Manager CEO Johnson after our last executive committee meeting to try to find the intersection of a lot of comments. And I think this is definitely in the category of not wanting to overcomplicate a matter and not wanting perfect to be the enemy of good, and start with something in the board operating guidelines that can be refined and adjusted over time, perhaps might even be another retreat topic. So therefore, what we did is the substantive change that's being recommended to the operating guidelines is the addition of an entirely new section, which you'll see starting on packet page 93 in the redlined version, or more specifically shows up in blue edits. And this section is called Regarding Communication with Staff. And what has been done is a number of bullets have been added and outlined here. The first of which is a simple bullet, but also a very important one, which is the board fully committing to its adopted agency values whenever staff communications are initiated. This is ensuring that all communications the board delivers are done with passion, with respect, with diversity, with trustworthiness, with collaboration, and with ownership in mind and well honored. There are additional bullets then. We discussed last time and for a few times about really prioritizing leveraging the agency response system, and therefore ensuring that all non-legal and non-personnel questions and requests for assistance go through the agency response system with the board office to ensure that directors receive the most up-to-date and accurate information, and that we minimize any redundant use of team time and resources. A bullet was noted to ensure, of course, that we direct our legal inquiries to our general counsel. We added a bullet to communicate directly with the general manager and CEO when direct staff communications are required and or leverage the general manager and CEO's designee for a given topic. For example, and as is noted, a committee chair and committee vice chair working with a functional leader designated by the general manager and CEO for such communications. We added a bullet around ensuring that we make every effort for non-email communication outside of business hours to not be made. In other words, while emails may be sent at various times, recognizing that folks have the ability to control filters and control their emails, but if it is a non-urgent matter, to not leverage non-email communications outside of business hours out of respect. We had a bullet in here around submitting inquiries in a manner that allows time for staff to respond when practicable. We added a note to ensure that we are directly addressing matters when we're able to do so without taking staff time. We had some discussion at the last executive committee meeting around directors really working together to consolidate responses, share responses with each other, so we're best armed to directly respond to constituents. There's a note in here around sending customers to our customer support resources and how to do that. There's a note in here around focusing our communications around policy decisions, a note and bullet as well around addressing issues and not personalities. There's a note in here about respecting our organizational structure. And then one thing I think that was really important at the very end there is to review on a semi-annual basis the volume and the nature of requests being sent by staff. Once again, we said this last time, but thanks to especially Ms. Knapp Rhodes, but the entire board office team, we have great insights now in terms of the data and the requests that are coming in, and we'll have more on staff time utilized and so forth. And that's something that we added in here as let's commit to review that. Aside from that substantially new section, then there were some minor adjustments made throughout to help jive with that section, a few tweaks here and there, just that were largely cleanup, and one word change on packet page 91 from Fast Tracks Corridors to Fast Tracks Projects, something that First Vice Chair Catlin had pointed out that really there's been a number of conversations over the past few months about all of the things that Fast Tracks was committed to do, and we wanted to find a more broad term to encompass everything there. So some minor cleanup in here, but the substantive changes are that new section. Again, an attempt to find a starting point for us. My expectation is that this will grow and evolve over time as the board does. So that being all stated, thank you for allowing me to walk through all of that. It's an important matter. First Vice Chair Catlin, are there any further comments you would like to make or address regarding the changes to the board operating guidelines that we're recommending?
At this time, no. I appreciate that you said that it might evolve over time, and I've been giving it some thought. And maybe we'll talk to you offline a little bit later. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from other directors? I mentioned both of them a number of times, so if Mr. Kroll or General Manager and CEO Johnson, either of you would like to speak, please raise your hand. If not, no worries. Okay, great. We're not taking any vote on this right now, so if anyone has any feedback or other directors do, please contact me. This will come back for action to the executive committee in September to make these changes. Okay, with that, we will move to other matters. Are there any other matters to discuss? Yes, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Yeah, the Chair of the Performance Committee, Catlin, and I, as Vice Chair, have been talking some about the need for data for context for many reasons, for making our decisions and performing our required oversight function to make sure we're being transparent with our constituents, and also when we see data that are incorrect out there, we can respond. My understanding is that staff is planning to bring us KPIs in September, which is great. Ms. Johnson mentioned the other night that we have KPIs that are sort of requirements for us. But it doesn't seem fair to expect the data we're wanting without saying what it is we need. So we're talking about bringing a list of suggestions and seeking them from other board members, bringing it to the Performance Committee in August 8th, I think, and trying to put together, sort of a list of things that the board would like to see. Some of those I think would be appropriate for our dashboard, and certainly other things. For example, other groups are coming out with a lot of data about RTD, that we're slower than other agencies in bringing back service, or that one that I've been seeing a couple times now, that our ridership is significantly down from pre-pandemic and more than others. And I think that those sorts of things, for instance, that last piece of data is apparently an Apter website posting that's based on projections from the transit app. But people out there in the world don't know that. And I think that we need the board members to understand what that is. I also think if we pull apart, it says the data I'm seeing says that we're at 43% of our pre-pandemic service. And I'm guessing that was at the end of June. I'm guessing that if we pull that apart and we can be given data on what the what the light rail numbers are like and what the bus numbers are like and what the commuter rail numbers are like, that we'll see that that number is really a reflection of our maintenance issues, which we're, you know, of course, not happy that those are causing problems and bringing down our ridership. But, you know, we've decided as a group that we need to move forward on that maintenance. So I think, again, that we need to begin a list of data items that we would like to see. And I'll be talking with Ms. Johnson later this afternoon. This is certainly a two-way conversation. We need to hear what's coming, but I think that it would be helpful. I hope it would be helpful. I guess that's a question, Ms. Johnson, and it certainly feels helpful to us to just lay out what we need to see. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. I saw First Vice Chair Catlin's hand go up, and Performance Committee Chair, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lynn. You stated it very well. I think it is incumbent upon us as board members to make the ask and not have to react when staff provides us stuff. That's not fair. So I agree, and we will be asking our fellow directors to provide input as to what they would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair. I see General Manager and CEO Johnson's hand. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Chair Catlin, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. Just for a point of clarity, as relates to the August 8th meeting, what was stated was that we would bring a scorecard. Questions had been put forward to all of you, or requests relative to what it is that we need to provide relative to the data. So I appreciate the solicitation that you guys will endeavor to do with board members. So with that, I will yield the floor.
Great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Second Vice Chair Geisinger, this is the best thing to provide some feedback between now and the Performance Committee on that and engage in that discussion there.
I think so, unless you have a different suggestion. Maybe we'll, Director Catlin and I can work with Mr. Kroll to send something out, and we can have a start of where people might look to come up with the sorts of data. And I think we have some things in mind that we can get people started thinking on. But you know, since it is around an agency scorecard, we thought taking that to the Performance Committee made the most sense.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And given that I think we're down to the 3 committee members here right now and no other directors, it would make sense for that to go out and be sent to the full board and collect any feedback so that folks can come ready to the Performance Committee to provide any of that direction.
Great.
Great. Any other discussion on that matter? Okay, great. Are there any other matters to discuss? All right, seeing none. Before we adjourn, I'll just note that the next executive committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, September 19th. The committee's work plan calls for us to finalize our operating guideline amendments related to the board to staff communications, continue our discussions related to the board's next retreat, have an initial discussion on a potential bylaws amendment to clarify the role of the executive committee, and as always, hear an update from our government relations officer. Seeing no further discussion, this meeting will be adjourned as of 1:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Thank you very much, everybody. Take good care.
Bye, everyone.